As part of our continuing look back at 10 seasons of The Agenda, tonight we're bringing you stories of trials and triumph. From autism to cancer, we'll share stories of people who are not only rising to a challenge, but also going above and beyond. That's all tonight on The Agenda.
Funding for The Agenda with Steve Paikin is provided by Ontario's more than 80,000 chartered professional accountants. Public policy leaders since 1879. More information is available at cpaontario.ca. And by contributions to TVO by viewers like you. Thank you.
Every day in the House of Commons before question period, several members of Parliament rise and, for a minute, can talk about whatever they want. Back in April 2012, Edmonton, Alberta MP Mike Lake got up to speak about his autistic son, Jayden. And there wasn't a dry eye in the House. I had the chance to speak with him shortly after that speech, and here's that conversation. And joining us now here in the studio is Mike Lake. Mike is the Conservative MP for Edmonton, Millwoods, Beaumont, and he's joined today by his son, Jayden. And we're happy to welcome both of you here at TVO.
It's good to be here.
Mike, I want to start by playing some tape.
Sure.
Because yesterday in the House of Commons, something rare happened. You started talking, and everybody shut up. You could hear a pin drop in that place. I was there up in the gallery, and I could hear this speech, and it's one of the most wonderful things I've ever heard in the House of Commons. So, Jayden, we're going to start by playing this tape, okay? You can watch this. You saw it yesterday. You were there.
You were there, right?
Roll tape, please.
Mr. Speaker, today is World Autism Awareness Day. It also marks 14 years since my son Jayden was diagnosed with autism. In many ways, Jayden's like a 3 or 4-year-old trapped in a 16-year-old's body. He's nonverbal, has trouble with abstract concepts, will cry when sad, and squeal loudly or giggle when happy. When something gets on his mind, he'll grab my face and inquire with an escalating ba 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 until he gets the explanation he needs to move on with his life. He's obsessed with dogs to the point where he'll go nose to nose with any dog he sees, regardless of size or demeanor, something we must always be aware of when out in public. In some ways, Jayden is very much like other 16-year-olds. He loves making chocolate chip cookies, working in the school library, and bowling with Dad on Saturday mornings. Mr. Speaker, I never dreamt I'd have a son with special needs, but I can honestly say I couldn't be more proud of my boy. He is always quick with a high five or a kiss, is never, ever a bully, and loves everyone without a hint of judgment. I think we could all use a little more of that.
Mike, there wasn't a dry eye in the House when you finished that speech. I know you know that. But let's go through this. What is autism?
Well, that's a big question, actually. I can maybe walk you through what our experience was like. And when Jayden was probably around 1.5 to 2 years old, he's having a drink of his water here. He likes to drink water. When he was 1.5 to 2 years old, he wouldn't respond when we would call him. When we would, call him to the room, or even if he was sitting right in the room with us and we said his name, he didn't recognize it, wouldn't look at us for anything. He would be immersed in whatever it was that had his attention at that time, whether it was watching Barney on TV or playing with something usually fairly simple and insignificant. And yeah, you like Barney, don't you? He's actually gotten into Barney again lately. So when he hears me say it, he's found Barney on YouTube, and he likes to still watch Barney videos. He's a little bit nostalgic. He hadn't seen them for years. But yeah, we would call him, and he wouldn't respond. Then we at first thought he was had a little bit of a tough time hearing. But when we would turn on a video from 2 floors away, he would come running downstairs and watch the video that he liked.
His hearing was
so we
fine.
knew that his hearing was just fine. There was something else going on. At the same time, he would really, to him, we were kind of tools to get what he wanted. So he would come find us if he wanted something from the pantry, chocolate chips or just anything that he liked to eat from the pantry, and he would come find us. He'd literally grab our hand and drag us to the pantry, and when we got there, he would grab us by the sleeve, and he'd lift our hand up towards what he wanted and make us grab it, and give it to him. And
Did
that
you have
was,
any idea what it was?
We had no idea at the time, actually. In fact, I had a cousin that mentioned autism at a wedding that we were at before his second birthday, and we kind of discounted it because we thought surely the doctors would have told us if he had autism, because we were asking questions of the doctors at the time, and they were sending us more on the speech path to try and look into ways to try and encourage him to talk, because he wasn't talking either. And it was my mom that Jayden's had a busy couple of days. We've done a lot of interviews, so he might yawn from time to time. He loves doing the interviews. But it was my mom that had read a book called Let Me Hear Your Voice. And in that book, it talked about a mother's discovery that her child had autism, and then everything she did afterwards to address that. But as she was in the phase of the book where it was talking about this mother who had the child with autism, and it was describing the child, as we read it when she gave us the book, it was describing Jayden to a T.
And then you knew.
And then we knew.
Do you know how he got it?
You know what? That's a really good question. We don't, and that's what research is looking into right now. There's quite a bit of evidence out there that says there's a genetic component of some sort or another, and there's a lot of work going on in something called the Autism Genome Project in that area. And in fact, Canadian researchers across the country, some right here in Toronto, Steve Shearer, for example, in Toronto, Peter Zatmari at McMaster, Lonnie Zwagenbaum out in Edmonton, are working as part of this worldwide initiative to try and discover some of the genetic components. We know that it's 5 times more prevalent in boys than girls, and oftentimes you see siblings with it. So there has to be some form of genetic component, but there's a lot of research going on to determine what else might be at play there.
Presumably there is a continuum between very low functioning and very high functioning people who have autism.
Absolutely.
Where's Jayden on the continuum?
You know, it's tough. We often say when we bring Jayden for an interview like this, Jayden is one person with autism. And so when you see Jayden, you see one person. He's not necessarily, it's hard to peg him specifically somewhere on a continuum, because in some areas he's quite severe. The fact that he doesn't talk, for example, he's completely nonverbal, would be fairly severe. But in other areas, in terms of his sort of level of aggression, those kind of things, he's not nearly as severe as others would be.
Does he understand you?
We think that he understands the concrete stuff pretty well. So he understands nouns, talking about people, talking about things like, if we say, Jayden, actually I should be careful what I ask him, because he might say yes. But if we ask him if he wants something that he likes, he will say yes, and vehemently say yes if I was to say it right now. So I'll avoid that. But actually, maybe I'll say something that we can get him afterwards. So if I was to say to him, Jayden, do you want some Smarties? Jayden, actually in this case, yeah. So if I was to ask him that, he probably would like Smarties, right? You like Smarties, don't you? Yeah, they're pretty yummy, hey? Yeah, we'll get you some Smarties after the show. Does that sound good? If maybe we go after the show and we'll get you some Smarties? Does that sound good? And he likes dogs, so if I mention dogs, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. And when we were playing the clip and it mentioned dogs, he even got excited about the dogs.
I notice he grabs your face quite a bit.
He does. I mentioned that in the clip, how he grabs the face and he will do the babas. And
he wants you looking at him, Mike.
He does want, because he really wants me to, right now he just wants me to talk about dogs. You know, the fact that he likes dogs. There's none around here right now, but he likes the fact that I talk about dogs. If we get talking about schedule, like anything to do with our schedule or our plans, you can see that he gets quite engaged, and he loves to walk through the schedule. He loves to look at it on paper. He wants me right now, when I say schedule, I can tell him that tonight we're gonna stay in Toronto, Jayden, and then you and Mummy and Janae are gonna stay in Toronto with your cousins, right? And Daddy's gonna fly to Ottawa tomorrow, and then Daddy's gonna come back to Toronto on Thursday, and we're all gonna be together. And then on Monday, you guys are going to fly back home. Right?
Home is Edmonton.
Yeah, home to Edmonton, yeah. And Daddy's going to go to Ottawa for one more night, and then Daddy's going to come home on Tuesday. Does that sound good? Does that sound good? Yeah?
High fives. There we go.
There you go.
Is Jayden on any kind of medication? Does he do therapy? What's the story there?
At this point, he's not on any medication. And it's not that we're entirely close to using it at some point if we need to.
Mike, you can look at him. He doesn't want you looking at me, so that's okay.
But in terms of therapy, he's had therapy since he was 2.5 years old. So when he was 2.5, we had workers come into the house about 36 hours a week, and do one-on-one therapy with him, intensive behavioral intervention. It started really, remember what I was saying, we couldn't get his attention. I mean, it really started by trying to get him to even just look. And they would take something as simple as a spoon and say, Jaden, give me the spoon. And so you'd put a spoon in front of Jaden. Do you remember this when you were a little boy? And they would put a spoon in front of him, and they would say, Jaden, give me the spoon. And they would stand there with their hand open, like this, and then they would force, he wouldn't do it naturally, and they would force his hand to grab the spoon, and then he's bored even talking about it, I guess, because it was so repetitive at the time. But no, he would grab the spoon and he would put it, they would put it, make him put it in their hand, and they would do that over and over and over again until eventually he did it. And there are a lot of rewards in that. I mentioned he liked Smarties. So at the time, they would oftentimes have Smarties there, and when they did it, they would grab the spoon, they would put it in his hand, and then he'd get a Smartie. And eventually, he had to do it himself to get that Smartie. And it was really interesting how that worked back then.
We should just explain, sometimes Jaden looks over my shoulder, not now, but sometimes he does, because your wife and daughter are over behind the other camera there.
That's right, okay. Yeah, so.
Does Jaden go to school?
Jaden does. He's in a grade 10 classroom. Do you like school? What's your favorite part of school? Do you like the library? You work in the library, don't you? Yeah. So his job at school, he goes there more for the social aspect of things, not so much the educational aspect. Most of the things at the grade 10 level would be very difficult for him. But in the library, what they do is they've got an aide that works with them all the time, and she'll take him to the library several times during the week, and he'll put books away and things like that. And they say that he does it as fast as any 16-year-old they've ever had work in the library. And in fact, what they've done is transitioned so that he goes to the Edmonton Public Library. Now the aide takes him there as part of the school day, and they've got a program there where he can work putting books away. And the other thing that they've done that's really cool at the school this year, and we haven't seen it in action yet, so it'll be interesting. These experiments are always interesting to see in action. He's looking at your questions right now, but he is taking musical theater. And so they have him playing an interesting role as an old man. He doesn't say anything, but he walks across the stage. And do you have a cane? Is that what your job as an old man? Do you carry a cane when you go across the stage? Yeah. And do you have a cup in your hand? Yeah. Oh yeah, pound it. There you go. And so he has a cup in his hand, and he has a cane, and they just keep working on him, showing him to walk across the stage, bent over with a cane and a cup in his hand, and that'll be his role in the play. And the kids embrace it. The kids love having him as part of it.
Can he draw pictures or write?
Well, actually, it's interesting. He was pulling open his iPhone right now. He's got an iPhone that he uses to talk. He uses it more to talk in the classroom, and the aide works on him to communicate with kids. He can type things in. He can actually write. If he wants a cookie or something like that, he would write the word cookie down. Okay. He doesn't deal very well with abstracts, so it has to be something concrete. But and he won't generally ask it as a full question automatically. We work on him with that, but he'll just generally write cookie if he wants one.
He's very affectionate with you.
He is, yeah, and he's hearing things that I talk about that engage him. This is what life's like at home. When he hears things that I talk about that engage him, he wants me to keep talking about them or wants more answers. Right now, he's trying to put his hand in my mouth, which he knows he's not supposed to do, right? You can't put your hand in my mouth. Oh, that's yucky. That's yucky.
Mike, I'm going to go to the opposite side of this
Sure.
debate, which is, as you know, there is a remarkable uptick in the autistic diagnoses that are happening these days. Now, obviously, this is not the case in Jaden's case, but do you through your travels on this subject, do you think that the profession is overdiagnosing autism today?
You know what? I'm not expert enough to comment on that. I think that probably when you look at those numbers, the 1 in 88 that they're talking about now, I think it's 1 in 54 boys. I mean, those are certainly, regardless, those are alarming numbers. In terms of the diagnosis, it's certainly probably accurate to say that there's more diagnosis happening now than there was in the past. But remember, when Jaden was 2, they wouldn't diagnose him with autism. It took a long time to get to that point. And we had come a long way before that point to get to where we were at that time. So I think we're seeing better diagnosis, which is leading a little bit to those numbers. And I do think that there's more prevalence. As I walk around today, parents of kids with autism recognize autism when they see it. And I feel like I recognize a lot more of it now than I did, say, 10 or 12 years ago even.
Do we have early screening programs now?
I think we're doing a better job, but I think we still got a long ways to go. Right now at the federal level, we have a surveillance project that's ongoing that has experts from across the country working on, defining exactly what it is and methods to recognize it across the country and then quantify it so that we can tell, if there's pockets of the country that have more autism than other places. We want to know those kind of things. And this is an important project that's going on right now.
Is there a fear of misdiagnosis in the early stages?
I would say, I guess it would be easy to say you wouldn't want to be diagnosed and go through all of the stress and find out that was wrong. On the flip side, I guess I'd rather have my child misdiagnosed and have intensive behavioral therapy being done to try and help him or her than not diagnosed and miss that window of opportunity, because the intensive behavioral therapy, that it does work. It's going to have an impact, obviously, on any kid that would have it, not just kids with autism.
Much of the attention when we talk about autism is focused on, obviously, young people who have it. You almost see or hear nothing about autistic adults. But presumably this guy's going to be an autistic adult someday, right?
Oh, for sure. And we talk a lot about lifespan issues. So you've got, you've got the kids, the 2.5 to 6-year-old that needs that early diagnosis. They need some form of intensive therapy early on. And I think the evidence proves that. But then those kids are going to go to school. And they're going to go through the school system from 6 to 18 or 19 or 20 in some cases, and maybe a little bit of a different program, continuing the momentum that they had early on and going through that system, the social aspect of school and all of those things. At the time that they're getting ready to come out of school, or well before probably, there needs to be a transition plan and a focus on vocational opportunities that might exist and what life's going to look like after school. One of the things you have to remember is that there's no lifespan issue with autism. Jayden, barring the fact that people with autism are less aware of danger, other than that aspect, they'll live as long as you or I will live.
Right.
And so there's that vocational element, and then I think all parents of kids with autism or family of people with autism will say there is that concern. What happens when we're not there? Because we'll have always been there, right? And what happens when we're gone?
I noticed both of you are wearing the blue puzzle pin.
Right.
What's that?
It's the blue puzzle pin is a piece from Autism Speaks, an organization called Autism Speaks, founded by Bob and Suzanne Wright out of the U.S. I can't remember how many years ago, and now has extended to Canada and really moving worldwide. And the puzzle piece, you can see I'm actually wearing 2 pins today. You've got the ribbon, which is the more generic symbol of autism, but both of them implement the puzzle piece. Autism is a puzzle, and it's funny because before I ever knew about the puzzle piece as a symbol, we often referred to our circumstance with Jayden as a puzzle, and just the fact that we don't know the whole picture, but we have to focus on the part of the puzzle that we're aware of, that we've got in Jayden, and really focus on how do we make his life better, and trust that God has a picture, a view of the overall puzzle in mind when he's looking at everything, you know what I mean?
Every parent has hopes and dreams and expectations for their child or children. So what are yours for him?
You know what, I hope that he can continue to be happy. He's a genuinely, Jayden, are you a happy kid? You're happy, right? Yeah, with your life. You like your friends at school? Do your friends treat you pretty well? Yeah, he's got something on his hand here that he is very focused on right now. But he's a very happy kid, and we hope that he can continue to be happy, continue to build relationships with people, continue to have close relationships with the people that he already has relationships with, that he can contribute. And when I say contribute, when I think of contributing for Jayden, I think of Jayden and another person being able to contribute more than that other person could contribute on their own. I'm not caught up in output in the general productive economic sense when I think of Jayden. I want him to be able to contribute in a way that's meaningful to him, and in a way that he's happy, and to make sure that when we are gone one day, that there are people surrounding him that love him as much as we do, and are aware of what he's going through. And at the same time, when I think of meaning in Jayden's life, we're really thankful for the opportunity to do what we're doing right now, to talk to you, to raise awareness so people get a chance to at least see one face of a person with autism and hear the story, and maybe that they might recognize it in other people and be able to instead of shaking their heads when they see a child in a grocery store lay down and have a tantrum, maybe they'll recognize it as something a little bit different and step in and pat someone on the back and offer a helping hand, right?
Mike, it's awfully good of you and Jaden to visit us here at TVO tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having us. Give him a high five, Jaden. Yeah. And now he's got to look at the questions again. Good job. Give me 5. Yeah.
Up next, nurturing the genius of a child doctors said would struggle. Right after this. Instead of mourning her son's diagnosis of autism, Christine Barnett fostered his passions and interests. She was once told her son Jacob might never be able to speak. Now her 15-year-old son is on track to become a Nobel Prize winner for his work in theoretical physics. How did she tap into Jacob's potential? Well, let's find out. Here's Christine Barnett, the author of Spark, a mother's story of nurturing genius, and her son, Jacob Barnett, student of theoretical physics at the Perimeter Institute in Waterloo, Ontario. And it's so good to have both of you here in the studio. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
Where are you from originally?
Indiana.
And you just picked up and left Indiana because?
There's physics here. I mean, there's physics everywhere, but there's this place called Perimeter Institute in Waterloo, and it's one of the big new places in physics. It was made like 15 years ago, and it's a very open, collaborative place, so I was like, I'm coming here.
What are you exploring right now?
At the very moment, I'm interested in quantum gravity, but that may change.
Okay. Can you tell me what quantum gravity is?
So basically, you have quantum mechanics, right? And you have general relativity, right? So quantum mechanics, you have these things, and they're behaving like waves, and they're behaving like particles. And in GR, you have a space, and your space is like a manifold. It's some arbitrary sheet, so your space could look like a sphere. And the goal is to try to make the two look the same.
Okay, I get. Did you understand the thing he said?
No, I never do. It's so sad.
Do you tell me? Do you find it? How do you find living in an environment? You're 15.
Yes.
Everybody else there is already working on their masters and PhDs and all of that. They're in their 20s.
Yeah.
Do you find that? How do you find that?
I don't think age is a primary issue or a concern. I treat it just like anything else.
And they treat you like anybody else?
Yes, except I can't go drinking.
Come on, they sneak you a beer when no one's looking, right?
When no one's looking.
Jake, they are saying some interesting things about you.
Okay.
Like, this guy's on a track to become a Nobel Prize winner someday.
Well, that'd be cool.
Are you daunted by those kinds of expectations put on you?
No pressure.
Well, that's what I mean. You feel that pressure?
Not really. It'll happen if it happens.
I've talked to a lot of autistic people.
Okay. Well, you're talking to another one.
I was going to say, you're autistic,
Yes.
but you're not like any other autistic kid, you'll forgive me for using the word, that I've ever met before.
Okay.
Most people, I think, are not happy to be autistic.
Well, I'm very happy to be autistic.
You are happy about it?
Yes.
Why?
Without being if I was not autistic, I would not be at the place I am right now. Autism is my way of thinking, it's my way of viewing the world, and it's because of that I'm able to do what I'm able to do best.
Now, clearly, there are some extraordinary things that you can do because of your autism. Are there some other things you can't do because of your autism?
I'm not very good at writing.
Yeah, but no 15-year-old kid's good at writing, so that's not saying much.
No, but I am bad at writing compared to other people.
Okay. I hear you're not much of a skater yet either.
Not yet.
We got to work on that.
Yeah, we got to work on it.
Okay, but
I keep
seriously,
falling.
folks, is there anything is there anything that because you're autistic you really have discovered, geez, I can't do this at all?
I don't feel like that. Every time that it's like, oh, you're autistic, you can't do this, that's a challenge that you can accept to show people that you can do it.
Okay.
Just because it's harder doesn't mean that you can't do it.
True enough. Okay, your turn. How did you find out? How old was he when you found out that he was autistic?
He was 2 years old.
What was he manifesting?
He had stopped communicating with everybody. So he had, over a period of about 6 months, he lost all of his language.
So he had been speaking? and then just stopped.
And stopped, completely stopped.
And were you told, I mean, when you were no doubt speculating at that time why this was happening, what were you thinking?
Well, it seemed like Jacob just had these really unique interests to me, and that he was very independent, which I found, that's actually true. But it got really scary when he didn't say mommy, he didn't say daddy anymore. There were some things going on that were just really frightening. And the professionals at the time told us that he would probably never really speak again. So,
Boy, were they wrong.
yeah, that was a...
Was this in Indiana?
Yeah, this was in Indiana, but I think at the time that was just, no matter where you would have been, that was what we thought of kids with autism. There were really no models to look up to. There was nobody who was showing what can somebody with autism really do.
So when you got this diagnosis that your son is autistic and he's never going to speak again, what was your reaction?
Well, I mean, at first I was just completely devastated. When they said it's a lifelong prognosis and we would need to look at who was going to care for him when we weren't around someday. So it was pretty scary.
You accepted that they were, of course, right.
Well, yeah. I mean, I believed them. They were my doctors and therapists and people that we trusted. And everybody was really, I feel like to this day, a lot of those people are good friends with us because we were just fighting to help Jacob. So
where did the spark come from? Where did that come from, that idea that, you know what, I'm going to reject what all of the professionals who ought to know think, and I have a different idea? How'd that happen?
Well, that is what happened. It really, I had a lot of people think that maybe I had just lost my mind. They just could not believe that I would reject the traditional therapies that were there. But what happened was I was running this little daycare at the time, and I had other typical children in my care, and they were just having so much fun being little kids. They were just running around in the sprinkler. They had this wonder and abandon about them, just reckless childhood joy. And it seemed like all we were doing was focusing on what Jacob couldn't do. And that was the therapy protocol. Just wake up every morning and do about 40 to 60 hours a week, focused everything on what was difficult for him. And to me, when I took a step back and looked at it and looked at the other children just having this wonderful childhood time, it just seemed like that was not the right path, to focus on what we could do, what he couldn't do all day long.
So tell me about that night under the stars.
I had a teacher come to our house and she told me, Jacob will never talk, he will never learn to read, give up hope, just get rid of his alphabet cards, get rid of everything. And so the next day I decided just not to send him back to the school. I didn't put him back on the bus. And that was a very difficult decision. What I did decide to do was to sneak away when I was supposed to be doing therapy. At the end of the day, I just put extra hours into the end of the day, and we went out under the stars and just played jazz music, turned the fog lights on, danced.
How old was he at the time?
He was 3.
So you have no memory of any of this?
I have slight memory, but not much.
Okay. And what happened when you did that night under the stars?
Well, I had brought a little box of popsicles along with me, and we sat on the roof of the car and we just looked up at the stars, this big wide sky full of stars. And for the first time, he reached over at me and he grabbed a popsicle. And that was the first real interest he had shown in us in quite a while. I mean, probably a year. And so from that point on, it's like when I found this common interest with Jacob, from that point on, he was a little bit more willing to come into the world that I was in. So.
But I can imagine the conversation you then had with your husband, which is, honey, we're going to disregard everything the professionals are saying. I've got an idea, and we're going to pursue my idea. How did that go over?
It didn't go over very well. My husband also has strong opinions. He was a very traditional person who, had worked his whole life to give these boys that we had a life that was typical, and he wanted them to go to school. He wanted them to do what every typical kid got to do. And but I just knew that it wasn't right. They had given up hope for Jacob, and I hadn't.
So when the night under the stars represented a breakthrough, I guess you came to realize we're going to have to do something different with him in terms of education, in terms of where to go now. Mm-hmm. What happened then?
So then at that point, people thought I was even a little more crazy because some of these things that he liked to do were considered repetitive behaviors. So he would, he would play with a glass and just look at the light, twisting it for hours on end. And instead of taking that away, I would give him 50 glasses, filled all different levels, and let him explore. So I just followed Jacob and really surrounded him with whatever he seemed to love. And the more I did that, the more it worked.
It worked, meaning what?
Well, he started talking again, and people were just baffled.
Can you tell us about that moment when he said his first words in, I guess, what would have been like a year or two or something?
Oh gosh, that moment. That was like music. I mean, hearing him talk, because everybody had said that was an impossible thing.
What did he say?
And, well, I put him to bed every night, and I would tuck him in, and I would say, "Good night, baby Jacob. You're my baby angel, and I love you very much." And one night he reached up, and he just completely unexpectedly looked me straight in the eyes, and he said, "Night-night, baby bagel." So all along, I guess he thought I'd been calling him a bagel.
Or he thought you were Jewish.
Maybe, but other than that, I was just so happy that he was talking. It was like a miracle happening, so.
You don't remember that, do you?
Not that particular instance.
No, but that must have been, wow.
It must have been.
It must have been. You were there. It must have been. You've now gotten involved with other, I mean, this is clearly a breakthrough of monumental proportions, and you've now taken this approach with other autistic children as well. Tell us about that.
Well, at first it was hard to get any of them to sign on because, what I was doing was completely opposite of what everybody else was doing. But there was this giant influx of children with autism in Indiana. Just a huge, if you look at incident rate charts, you'll just see a huge increase. I think it's 2,000% the year that he turned 3. And people were just desperate to do anything they could. And I had a little garage that I set up. It was, converted into a little school, and I just started working with the kids for free after I was done with daycare. And throughout the course of every semester, I reached about 200 kids and was able to repeat the results with almost all of the kids that I worked with.
And
So
have you told the professionals about this?
pretty soon they started coming to me because they wondered what I was doing. I started having schools in the area contact me, doctors contact me, and everybody wondered what I was doing.
You have done something that usually only kind of big name superstars do. You gave a TED Talk.
Yes.
And I want to play a little clip from this TED Talk.
Cool.
Because you're talking about discovering what individuals are good at, and you started to talk about Sir Isaac Newton, who was a fair scientist in his time. I think it's
Yeah.
accurate to say.
Yeah, probably top scientist of the 17th century.
Yeah, I think so. So let's play this clip and then we'll come back and chat, okay?
Okay,
Roll
cool.
tape, please.
In 1665, Isaac Newton was at the University of Cambridge. Now, for those of you who really know your history, at that time, Cambridge had closed due to the plague. So Isaac Newton, he didn't have a way to learn. He had to stop learning, and he was probably, hiding in a dormitory with his cat running from the plague. Now, while he was doing this, he decided he had to stop learning, but he didn't want to stop thinking. Okay? So, because of that, he was thinking about this problem in astrophysics. And specifically, I think he wanted to calculate the motion of the moon around the Earth. So I sort of reamped that problem into the case of Mercury around the sun. So, okay. What he did was, in order to solve this problem, he created calculus, Newton's 3 laws, the universal law of gravitation, the reflecting telescope to check his work, and optics, and all this crazy stuff. In that 2 years that he had stopped learning.
You're pretty funny, You do know that, eh? You got a good sense of humor.
Thanks.
Are you saying, though, that schools are not the best places in which to think and learn?
I think that schools are great for learning, but there's a difference between learning and, doing research or actually solving problems. If you're just going to read a book and solve textbooks problems, you can be the greatest student ever, but if you aren't going to change it, then you're no better than the people who wrote the textbooks.
Okay, but does that theory work for people like Jacob or Albert Einstein or Isaac Newton, but not everybody else?
I think it should work for everybody.
It should, eh?
Yes.
How do you see that happening?
How do I see that happening?
Yeah.
I think that really in education, there's really two keys. There's the learning, of course, and then there's the thinking. And actually, there is quite a bit of research that's able to be done even at an elementary level. So you can actually solve problems which haven't been solved before, even if you only have a knowledge of, say, matrices or programming or stuff like that. So yeah, I think that everybody could do it.
Jake, are you a genius?
Some people consider me to be. I just consider myself to be a regular person who's very motivated about his subject.
Because I'm told you don't like being called genius, even though it's in the title of your mother's book here.
Okay, well, I didn't write the title.
And you didn't veto it either, I guess.
Okay, I had a little bit of input on this here, but I didn't make the title.
Okay, but all those squiggles, which I get through mathematical equations, that's...
Yes,
you
yes,
had
that's hyperbolic geometry.
Of course it is. I knew that, yeah.
Yeah, it's even got a hyperboloid on there.
You've got siblings.
Yes, two of them.
Younger?
Yes.
Both younger. Were there lessons in the way you raised him that you then applied to your two other children who I gather are not autistic, are, what do we call them? What do you, normal? What do you call it?
Jake. They were not Jake, definitely.
They were not Jake.
Correct.
Okay, that's fair.
So I think everybody is who they are. And I think it's really important when you have a label not to let that label define you. So, and I've talked to lots and lots of moms with kids on the spectrum, kids with ADHD, kids with various learning disabilities, or just struggling in school with something. And I say, well, what are they good at? What is the thing that they're passionate about? Let that define them. And so I've done that with my other two children. And
their passions are what? What have you discovered?
So the middle one loves meteorology, and he creates models with chaotic physics in order to more accurately predict the weather. And he started out just being a little boy who liked to go out in storms. And he would bring the storms inside. He would bring puddles inside the house. And then the youngest one, he liked to kind of take his boots and go around this pond near our house and collect all these samples. And he just explored. I let them explore, and I think kids need time to explore.
Do our schools do that?
Well, the problem is we need to break some rules. And it's time that we stand up for the fact that some of those rules are getting in our way. And when we do that, we can give people the time that they need to create something. And I think you're only as good as your teacher. Mm-hmm. So if your teacher's yourself, you can rise to your greatest potential. So if I had tried to teach Jacob math or physics, for example, I mean, he would still be stuck before calculus because that's where I am at. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of creating motivation that is self-driven. And you can really only do that by just pursuing what you love.
You mentioned your second is into meteorology. How about the third?
Mm-hmm. Oh, the third one, he likes to do a subject called pathophysiology. And so it's like disease processes and stuff like that.
And the other two are how old?
They are 10 and 12 right now.
So they're on a path. Mm-hmm. They've found their passion and they're going to presumably pursue it.
They are. Now, the middle one, he didn't necessarily want to pursue the academic side of the meteorology. He just loved going out into storms. But then Jacob showed him a textbook from college that was a meteorology book and just plopped it down in front of him and said, let's open this up and see what we can do. And Wesley realized that those equations were out of his depth. And then he was self-motivated to learn it.
Mm-hmm. I also showed him a computer program. I had already modeled a very basic thing, and I just showed him, okay, here's this. This is what it does. This is a very simple model of the atmosphere. This is what it does. And I mean, now he wants to learn programming as a result of it. Because, yeah, a lot of problems you have to use a computer to solve.
Do you get on with your siblings?
Do I get what with my siblings?
Do you get on with them? Do you get along with them okay?
Yes.
3 boys in one home, and
yeah.
there's not
No.
Craziness all the time?
Not too much tension. No.
It's a different kind of craziness.
It's a different kind.
Yeah,
It's
well, they're very
different kind.
motivated people, so we have laboratories everywhere, and so lots and lots going on.
Christine, is there anything, Bill Gates is the offspring of two apparently highly intelligent professional university professors. So I guess people are not terribly shocked that he turned out to be a computer whiz and, okay. Is there anything in your or your husband's backgrounds that would have at all, he's laughing, you're laughing, forecasted this?
No. But I will say there's a stubborn streak that runs in my family, and it's come in really handy. I mean, as parents, this is the thing. All of our kids are going to face challenges. And that's common to every single one of us. And the thing is, we need to know when to stand up for them during those challenges, even if it goes against what everybody else thinks, because as parents, we know in our hearts what our kids need. And we need to trust that a little more and give ourselves permission to follow our gut instincts for our kids.
Let me ask you, Jake, one last question, and that is, we just got some test scores back. The province of Ontario tests kids in 3 different grades for how well they're doing at math.
Okay.
And for the last few years, the math scores have been coming down.
Okay.
And the thinking is that young people today are afraid of maths and sciences. They're just not comfortable learning that kind of stuff. It's outside their comfort zone. What would you say to kids to try to demystify or make them more comfortable with the idea that math can be fascinating, interesting, fun, accessible, and they should overcome their fear?
Math is very interesting. Everything in mathematics is just a picture. And there is a lot more to mathematics than x squared plus 1 is 2 or something like that. Really, I would characterize mathematics as the study of symmetry. And I would characterize physics as the study of structure in nature. But I mean, just mathematics is structure and mathematics is symmetry. So
Can anybody do it?
anybody can do it, just as long as you apply yourself.
Okay. Boy, is it a pleasure to meet
And you draw the
two.
pictures.
And you draw the pictures
Yes,
as you did on the
you
front of the
have
book.
to draw the pictures for the equations, otherwise it's nonsense.
Is that you?
Yeah, that's me.
Cute picture. It's a great pleasure to meet you both. Christine Barnett, Jacob Barnett. I don't think I've ever met anybody like you two before, so this was a real pleasure for us too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, a biography of cancer, right after this. Very few of us have not been touched by cancer. Although it's no longer a death sentence, it's estimated nearly 200,000 Canadians will have been diagnosed with cancer before 2015 is over. Dr. Siddhartha Mukherjee is an oncologist and cancer researcher at Columbia University Medical Center. His experiences became the basis for his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Emperor of All Maladies. I sat down with him back in 2011, and here's that conversation. Joining us now, Siddhartha Mukherjee. He is the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning The Emperor of All Maladies, a biography of cancer. He's also oncologist and researcher at Columbia University Medical Center, and we're so happy to have you in that chair here in Toronto.
Yeah, my pleasure being here.
Congrats on the Pulitzer, incidentally. That's not a bad thing to win, is it?
Thank you. It's an amazing honor.
I'm not going to pretend this is an original first question, but you know, you're going to get this question when you call your book what you called your book. You did not set out, you tell us, to write a history, but rather a biography of cancer. What's the difference?
Well, I didn't want to write a standard history. This isn't a standard history in the sense that, you know, in part, this is my story. I was training as an oncologist and cancer medicine while I was writing this story, and I entered the story. Historians don't usually enter their own histories. And the second aspect of it was, you know, I really draw a portrait of the same illness. It's not really one illness, but a family of illnesses, but the idea of obsessively looking at this family over time, like a portrait. And in the end, it felt as if I was really describing an entity, like a biography. And so therefore, I used the word. In fact, the title came quite late in the writing of the book.
I don't know if you've read many of the reviews, but you know, some people will have pointed out that by calling it a biography, it suggests that it's about one thing, as a biography is about a person, whereas cancer, as you well know better than anybody, is about many, many different things. Is that a problem?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a problem. I mean, I think it's absolutely true, and the book goes to great length in pointing out that this is precisely what it is. It diffracts. But in fact, what's interesting is that one of the things that it begins to happen, if you trace the history of cancer, cancer is imagined in different times as different things. And in fact, the whole idea of the diversity of cancer was observed a little bit by pathologists hundreds of years ago. It's really quite a modern idea. And so right up to the 1970s, we had advertisements coming out in national newspapers saying, cure cancer, let's cure Mr. Nixon, cure cancer, one single C cure, one single C cancer. So the idea that this has been with us as a singular entity, this thing, is actually quite an old idea. And the idea that in fact it's not one but many is a relatively new idea.
Is that the biggest misconception about cancer today, that it's a thing rather than 200 things?
It is one of the misconceptions, although I think it's becoming less and less so as people realize that breast cancer and prostate cancer are two very different manifestations. On the flip side, you don't want to overemphasize the diversity either, because in fact it's turning out that many cancers that don't look like each other whatsoever have deeper connections. Like leukemia, certain variants of leukemia have a very deep connection to certain variants of, might be lung cancer or gastrointestinal cancers. So you don't want to overemphasize the idea that it's so many diseases that we shouldn't even be talking about it in the similar terms, because there are deep commonalities that run through all of these illnesses.
Having said that, you do call it the quintessential product of modernity.
Yeah.
But having said that, you are able to trace the recorded history of cancer back very, very far. How far?
In fact, one of the ironic things is, although we imagine cancer as a modern disease, the very oldest human medical documents, literally the very oldest human medical documents, have cases which sound today to contemporary ears, to contemporary surgeons, to contemporary oncologists, as if they're describing cancer, particularly breast cancer. And in fact, the Edwin Smith Papyrus, which was originally written, give or take 2500 BC, contains, as one of its index cases, it only has about 50 cases, one of its index cases has a case that resembles breast cancer.
I mean, you can't really know that, can you? There's obviously no microscopes, no CT scans, so you can't know that.
In fact, the word doesn't even exist.
Right.
The word comes about much later, and so you can only guess. But the scribes did a remarkable job of describing, and usually even today, the first diagnosis of cancer is made based on descriptive qualities, long before we understand exactly what the pathological drivers are in any particular form.
So are you satisfied that in fact the Egyptians identified and knew what cancer was as we understand it today all that long ago?
It's not clear to me. I mean, it's a conjecture. But certainly, if you look at ancient specimens going down 1,000 years, maybe even longer, you can see signs of cancer. Now, this is looking at actual pathological specimens. For instance, in bone cancers, you can see that you can see mummies that have stigmata of cancer or actual pieces of bone cancer within them, and that goes back 1,000, maybe 1,500 years.
You referenced this very quickly a moment ago, but I want to bring you back to it and focus on it a little more. This is the 40th anniversary of Richard Nixon's declaration that he was starting a war on cancer. And we have a lot of young viewers on this program who won't even remember who Richard Nixon was. Right. So will you put a little, forgive the pun here, put a little flesh on that bone and let us know what that was all about?
Well, we were talking in the late 1960s, early 1970s. This was a time, you have to put yourself in that time. North Americans had put a human being on the moon. They had solved the cracking of the atom bomb. They had come out of what was clearly becoming a great victory in the war. And the idea that this would be a sort of processional march until all illnesses had been cured was very much part of the culture. And in the midst of all of this, the early scientific advances, which were made in the 1960s through the 1970s, really pumped up a kind of notion that if we just put in enough money, if we just put in enough resources, if everyone worked hard enough, much like the Manhattan Project, we would solve the problem of cancer. Again, single cancer, single C. And Nixon was ultimately persuaded, for both political reasons but scientific reasons too, to declare war on cancer. And he publicly did so through the National Cancer Act.
Let's talk about some of the champions of that war on cancer. The Laskers, for example. Who were they? What did they do?
Mary Lasker was an amazing woman, a philanthropist of her time. She was independently wealthy. She had actually, interestingly, had made a contribution early on by designing prefab dresses just after the war, reasoning that one of the reasons that women weren't going to work was they couldn't afford tailor-made dresses. So this was already Mary Lasker's contribution. But in the 1950s, Mary Lasker became interested, as she called it, in transforming the geography of American health, of the landscape. And among those things, prominent among those was cancer. And so she directed an enormous amount of philanthropic energy to creating a kind of public platform for cancer. She used to say, I don't want to be a fundraiser, I want to be a friend raiser. And this was, her energy was very much part of this.
Sidney Farber, his connection.
Sidney Farber was Mary Lasker's comrade in arms, as it were. He made a very important scientific discovery, collaborating with others. He was one of the first people to use chemotherapy in children, in his case, to treat a variant of leukemia. But then he sort of came out of his basement. He had a laboratory, situated deep in the basement in Boston. And he sort of came out of his basement and he began to wonder, how does one create a public platform for cancer? And he stumbled upon the idea of the Jimmy Fund, for instance, using a series of icons to really get the public interested, sympathetically interested in cancer. And then from the Jimmy Fund, he moved in collaboration with Mary Lasker to really demanding for a national platform for cancer. And that ultimately leads Nixon and others to launch the war on cancer.
You're in Southern Ontario right now, not in New England. I know in New England, everybody knows what the Jimmy Fund is.
Yes.
I'm not sure everybody does here. But I forget what the kid's name was, but he basically took some kid with a very long,
his name
probably
was
Scandinavian name or something?
His name was Einar Gustafsson.
There you go.
So you
right.
could have had the option of the Einar Gustafsson Fund for Cancer or the Jimmy Fund for
And he
Cancer.
called him Jimmy.
Exactly, he called him Jimmy. And that goes back a little bit to Farber's and Lasker's genius. Mary Lasker's husband, Albert Lasker, was an advertising executive. He sort of invented, one might say, invented contemporary advertising. So Mary Lasker was immersed in a culture which said, well, how do you take Einar Gustafsson and make him into this huge public icon? Well, one way you do it is by rechristening him Jimmy, and becomes the Jimmy Fund. And there are people who still remember as children going out to baseball games with little canisters saying, give 2 cents for the Jimmy Fund. Now, what's important is that the 2 cents were not important, but the idea that Jimmy became an icon, that was far more important. And that was Farber's and Lasker's genius, to figure out that it's not the 2 cents, it's the larger question, it's the larger campaign that really drives this.
Everybody who goes to Fenway Park sees that sign
Everybody
on the
who
wall,
goes-
the Jimmy
absolutely,
Fund.
yes.
So their efforts really eventually translated into a national war, right? They kind of put it on the national agenda.
Absolutely, they put it on the national agenda. There were many, many others who helped, but yes, they are two preeminent figures.
You mention in the book as well, during the 1950s, the New York Times refused to print the phrase breast cancer. What did they call it instead?
It's a really amazing episode. This is 1950. We're not talking about 1850. A woman calls up the New York Times. Fannie Rosenau called up the New York Times and said she wanted to place an advertisement for survivors with breast cancer so they could meet as a group. And the society editor got on the phone and said, Ms. Rosenau, we can't put a survivors group for breast cancer. What do we say? This was women with diseases of the chest wall. So the euphemism becomes an imprisonment, essentially. You can't even talk about it.
Why so taboo?
Well, breast cancer was twice as taboo because it was cancer, a stigmatized disease in a stigmatized organ. This was a time when talking about sexual organs, talking about sexuality, especially for women, was not really permissible. And the idea that somehow you had disease, illness in this organ was considered, so deeply taboo that you wouldn't even talk about it.
At what point did mass media start to get less taboo about this?
Well, there were several people who helped, and I point out their stories. They're just important in this story, in my story, as Sidney Farber, the scientist, or Mary Lasker, the philanthropist. For instance, Rose Kushner. She was a woman who was a journalist and had breast cancer, and began to publicly appear in scientific conferences. And she began to heckle scientists and surgeons about their own data, saying, "Wait a second, you're operating on us. We aren't." We are participants in all of this. This isn't a one-sided equation. Patients have a role to play as advocates, as people who understand, people who need understanding.
Let's take just a few more minutes and get your view on how long you've been doing what you've been doing and what you've been able to achieve before we ask some others to join us here at the table. So let's start there. How long have you been practicing?
About 10 odd years. It all seems a blur right now, but yes.
10 years. In that time, how much has changed in the way you treat cancer, and I guess particularly cancer of the blood, which is your area of expertise?
Well, I think there's some dramatic changes. In 2000, in the 90s, when I was just beginning my training in medicine, there was an illness called variant of cancer called chronic myelogenous leukemia. We used to think that this was a disease that could only be treated by a very toxic form of therapy, including transplantation, a bone marrow transplant. Well, in the middle of all of this, and many people say, well, there's no chance you'll ever invent a pill that will make this cancer go away. Well, there is such a pill now, and it's one of the exemplars of a new wave of medicines in cancer therapy called targeted therapies. Now, by target, we mean that these medicines somehow uniquely go and find cancer cells and kill cancer cells and spare all the other cells in your body. And you might think that's a small task, but it's an enormous, enormous kind of achievement. Now, are there many such pills, targeted therapies? No, we're still in the infancy of the field, but they've transformed the field. Chronic myelogenous leukemia, a man or woman with chronic myelogenous leukemia, this was a disease that was uniformly, ultimately fatal. You would die of this disease. It's now thought that if you take this medicine, your life expectancy is no different from anyone else. So you've converted this lethal disease into a chronic disease.
The thing is, I guess when you take an oath as a physician, the first thing that you are obliged to do is do no harm. But before this revolutionary change came about, I guess you had to do harm in order to cure people of cancer. Isn't that fair to say?
That's absolutely fair to say. And that was, there's a way, there's a kind of internal tug of war that the discipline went through, still going through, whenever you treat a patient. I mean, how much harm are you allowed to do? What is the limit of harm, and how much do patients know? Because unlike many other forms of medicine, cancer therapy is always on the forefront of trial running. And trials, by their very nature, explore unexplored questions. It's their very nature to ask a question that hasn't been answered so far. And you try to make sure that the patients are kept as safe as possible, but ultimately it's an experiment. I sometimes say that medicine is the most human of all the sciences that was stuck with the most inhuman of all the experiments.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, December 2nd, 2015. Tomorrow on the program, we'll explore the hidden emotional and physical costs endured when a person becomes sick, not just for the patient, but also for those who care for that patient. And we hope you can join us for that. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
Funding for the Agenda with Steve Paikin is provided by Ontario's more than 80,000 chartered professional accountants. Public policy leaders since 1879. More information is available at cpaontario.ca.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.